morning. You can't see me. There you can see me. It's pretty early in the morning, so I'm not completely even, I look terrible. Now you might see a different background behind me. That's because I've moved my desk. I do that sometimes. So I have a different background because I'm in a different room. I've moved my desk. So there you go. All right, we're going to go ahead and do our reading lesson this morning. Let's turn in your reader book to page 45. As soon as you get there, I'll tell you who this strange looking man is on the screen. All right, you should be on page 45. Now, the name of this is called A Just Judge. Okay, now the man that you see on the screen, his name is Leo Tolstoy. Leo Tolstoy. He was born about 150 years ago. He was a Russian, and he received a really good education in Russia. And then he went to, his family was rather wealthy. He went back after he got his education to live on his family estate for many years, where he wrote many novels and lots of short stories. And some of his short stories are what we're going to read today. And we're going to actually read 3 of them. One of them is a little bit longer short story, but we're going to read it. Okay, now, since this is a folk tale, these 3, I'm going to actually read these to you so we can kind of discuss them a little bit, okay? So this is different than just a regular old story, okay? Some stories, most stories I want you to read on your own, but sometimes there's some that I don't. Okay, so, and then you're going to have 1 page to do as an assignment, and then 1 page we're going to look at on our own, okay? In your work text, but we'll get to that in a minute. Let's go ahead and look at page 45. Now, up at the top, you see kind of a, you might call that Middle Eastern, okay? There's the other reason why I wanted to read this is because there's some words in here that you may not be familiar with. Even I'm not real familiar with them, but I know how to pronounce them because I've read this before. All right, so a just judge. What kind of qualities would a just judge have? What does it mean to be just? Say it out loud. Did you say maybe fair or honest? Yeah, I think so. Now, just like a fable, remember we talked about fables last week and then you wrote one. A fable is a really short story that typically uses animals, remember? And it teaches a moral at the end. It's very short, typically very short, okay? Well, a folk tale is kind of the same. It's typically a little bit longer, but it doesn't use just animals. Typically, it uses people. And in it, there will be a kind of a moral at the end of it as well. Some are very short, some are very long. But they're called folk tales. If you break that word up, folk tales, tales as in T-A-L-E-S, the kind of stories. Okay, folk tales, these are stories that have been told from this parent told his children, and then his children told their children, and it's kind of been passed down, and then somebody finally wrote it down. All right, so let's look here at page 45. Now, we're going to go ahead and start reading, okay? Now, you can see the setting looks like it's probably a long time ago, maybe in the Middle Eastern area, okay? All right, so you follow along with me because there's some words in here that are kind of difficult, and I want you to read those with me, okay? An Algerian king named Bacchus wanted to find out whether or not it was true, as he had been told, that in one of his cities there lived a just judge who could instantly discern the truth and from whom no rogue was ever able to conceal himself. A rogue is kind of like a cheater or a bad guy. Bacchus exchanged clothes with a merchant and went on horseback to the city where the judge lived. At the entrance to the city, a cripple approached the king and begged alms of him. Bacchus gave him money and was about to continue on his way, but the cripple clung to his clothing. "What do you wish?" asked the king. "Haven't I given you money?" "You gave me alms," said the cripple. "Now grant me one favor. Let me ride with you as far as the city square. Otherwise, the horses and camels may trample me." Bacchus set the cripple behind him on the horse and took him as far as the city square. There he halted his horse, but the cripple refused to dismount. "We have arrived at the square. Why don't you get off?" asked Bacchus. "Why should I?" the beggar replied. "This horse belongs to me. If you are unwilling to return it, we shall have to go to court." Hearing their quarrel, People gathered around them, shouting, "Go to the judge. He will decide between you." Bacchus and the cripple went to the judge. There were others in court, and the judge called upon each one in turn. Before he came to Bacchus and the cripple, he heard a scholar and a peasant. Scholar is typically a wealthy, smart person, and a peasant is just a poor person. They had come to court over a woman. The peasant said she was his wife, and the scholar said she was his. The judge heard them both, remained silent for a moment, and then said, "Leave the woman here with me and come back tomorrow." When they had gone, a butcher and an oil merchant came before the judge. The butcher was covered with blood and the oil merchant with oil. In his hand the butcher held some money, and the oil merchant held onto the butcher's hand. "I was buying oil from this man," the butcher said, "and when I took out my purse to pay him, he seized me by the hand and tried to take all the money away from me. That is why we have come to you. I holding on to my purse and he holding on to my hand. But the money is mine and he is a thief." Then the oil merchant spoke. "That's not true," he said. "The butcher came to me to buy oil, and I had poured him a full jug. He asked me to change a gold piece for him. When I took out my money and placed it on a bench, he seized it and tried to run off. I caught him by the hand, as you see, and brought him here to you." The judge remained silent for a moment. Then he said, "Leave the money here with me and come back tomorrow." When his turn came, Bacchus told what had happened. The judge listened to him and then asked the beggar to speak. "All that he said is untrue," said the beggar. "He was sitting on the ground, and as I rode through the city he asked me to let him ride with me, and I set him behind me on my horse and took him where he wanted to go. But when he got there, he refused to get off and said that the horse was his, which is not true." The judge thought for a moment and said, "Leave the horse here with me and come back tomorrow." I have to have a coffee break. Let's continue reading. The following day, many people gathered in court to hear the judge's decisions. First came the scholar and the peasant. "Take your wife," the judge said to the scholar, "and the peasant shall be given 50 strokes of the lash." The scholar took his wife, and the peasant was punished. Then the judge called the butcher. "The money is yours," he said to him, and pointing to the oil merchant, he said, "Give him 50 strokes of the lash." He next called Bacchus and the cripple. "Would you recognize your horse among 20 others?" He asked Bacchus. "I would," he replied. "And you?" he asked the cripple. "I would," said the cripple. "Come with me," the judge said to Bacchus. They went to the stable, and Bacchus instantly pointed out this horse among the 20 others. Then the judge called the cripple to the stable and told him to point out the horse. The cripple recognized the horse and pointed to it. The judge then returned to his seat. "Take the horse, it is yours," he said to Bacchus. "Give the beggar 50 strokes of the lash." When the judge left the court and went home, Bacchus followed him. "What do you want?" asked the judge. "Are you not satisfied with my decision?" "I am satisfied," said Bacchus, "but I should like to learn how you knew that the woman was the wife of the scholar, and the money belonged to the butcher, and that the horse was mine and not the beggar's." "This is how I knew about the woman. In the morning I sent for her and said, 'Please fill my inkwell.' She took the inkwell, washed it quickly and deftly, and filled it with ink. Therefore it was work she was accustomed to. If she had been the wife of the peasant, she would not have known how to do it. This showed me that the scholar was telling the truth. And this is how I knew about the money. I put it into a cup full of water, and in the morning I looked to see if any oil had risen to the surface. If the money had belonged to the oil merchant, it would have been soiled by his oily hands. There was no oil on the water, therefore the butcher was telling the truth. It was more difficult to find out about the horse. The cripple recognized it among 20 others, even as you did. However, I did not take you both to the stable to see which of you knew the horse, but to see which of you the horse knew. When you approached it, it turned its head and stretched its neck towards you. But when the cripple touched it, it laid back its ears and lifted one hoof. Therefore, I knew that you were the horse's real master." Then Bacchus said to the judge, "I'm not a merchant, but King Bacchus. I came here in order to see if what is said of you is true. I see now that you are a wise judge. Ask whatever you wish of me, and you shall have it as a reward." "I need no reward," replied the judge. "I am content that my king has praised me." That was a very good story. Now let me ask you just a couple of questions about it, okay? So what is it that King Bacchus wanted to find out? if the judge truly was a just judge and could discern truth. So why did the king, before he left out, why did he change clothes with a beggar? He knew that if he went over there as a king, that he wouldn't get a true view or a true answer, would he? Who does the king meet on the way to the city? He meets that beggar or that crippled person. Now, it says that he gave him alms. What are alms? Alms is money. It's just money. Now, during the time that they go to the court, okay, there were 3 court cases. So why do you think the judge did not decide right then and there? He had to have time for discernment. Typically that's the case. And sometimes we don't have time, but he did. He was the judge, so he did. So do you think that how he made his decisions were good, honest, fair, just? I do. I think they were completely. So I think that's great. So the king finally at the end of the story told the judge who he was. The judge did not know. Apparently he did not. Do you think, because the king said, okay, so you're awesome, you're great, everything I've heard about you is true, so tell me anything you want and you can have it. And he answered him, I need no reward. I'm content that my king has praised me. What do you think about that answer? I think that was an awesome answer. I think that he's wise, and I think that he obviously is full of discernment and he's knowledgeable, but he's also very humble. So I think that that story that Leo Tolstoy wrote teaches the lesson of humility and just and fairness. I think that was a good story. All right, let's look at 2 more. These are very short. Look at page 50. This is called 3 Rolls and a Pretzel. That kind of makes me hungry. Now, this is a very short story by Leo Tolstoy. His name is hard to say. What kind of lessons do you think that we can learn from a pretzel and a shirt? Let's read this and find out. Feeling hungry one day, a peasant bought himself a large roll and ate it. But he was still hungry, so he bought another roll and ate it. He was still hungry, so he bought another roll and he ate it. When the 3 rolls failed to satisfy his hunger, he bought some pretzels. After eating 1 pretzel, he no longer felt hungry. Suddenly, he clapped his hand to his head and cried, "What a fool I am! Why did I waste all those rolls? I ought to have eaten a pretzel in the first place." So, what do you think the point is of this short story? Kind of, when you read it at first, you're like, "Oh, that's kind of dumb," but what's the point of it? There's a point to it. There's a reason why he wrote it. Now, he ate 3 rolls and was still hungry. 3 rolls, okay? And he was still hungry. So then he got a pretzel, and after the pretzel, he wasn't hungry anymore. And he said, "Oh, I should have bought the pretzel in the first place." Was it really the pretzel that made him not full? No, it was the fact that he had 3 rolls and then a pretzel. So had he bought the pretzel first and ate it, he would have still been hungry, right? So what do you think the moral or the lesson of this is? Well, it's kind of hard on this one, but I mean, you could have bought 1 roll and been happy. I mean, it would have, I guess, to be content with what you have. That's funny because I read that today, this morning before I started these lessons when I was doing my quiet time. I read that today. So this is a humorous story. It's just kind of funny, and it just shows that Leo Tolstoy had a sense of humor. So he wrote this to kind of just show a sense of humor, that people think silly things, that it wasn't the pretzel, it was the fact that he had the 3 rolls before he had the pretzel. So anyway, okay, so let's look at the next one. This was where the shirt comes in. It's called The King and the Shirt. A king once fell ill. I'll give half my kingdom to the man who can cure me, he said. All of his wise men gathered to decide how the king could be cured, but no one knew. Only one of the wise men said that he thought when he could cure the king. If you can find a happy man, take his shirt, put it on the king, and the king will be cured. The king sent his emissaries to search for a happy man. They traveled far and wide throughout his whole kingdom, but they could not find a happy man. There was no one who was completely satisfied. If a man was rich, he was ailing. If he was healthy, he was poor. If he was rich and healthy, he had a bad wife. Or if he had children, they were bad. Everyone had something to complain of. Finally, late one night, the king's son was passing by a poor little hut, and he heard someone say, "Now, God be praised. I've finished my work. I've eaten my fill, and I can lie down and sleep. What more could I want?" The king's son rejoiced and gave orders that the man's shirt be taken and carried to the king, and that the man be given as much money as he wanted. The emissaries went in to take off the man's shirt, but the happy man was so poor he had no shirt. All right, so what's wrong with the king? He's sick. He's sick. So the wise man thinks that getting a happy man's shirt and putting it on him would make him happy or would make him well. Why? So his emissaries went out, that's his wise men. They went out to try to find a happy man. Why did they have so much difficulty in finding a happy man? Because no matter what circumstance somebody was, they had problems. If they were wealthy, they were sick. If they were poor, they were, if they were not sick, they were too poor to have a shirt. If they were healthy and poor, they had a bad wife, or healthy and rich, they had a bad wife. So something was wrong with everybody. So they didn't find a happy man. So do you think finding a truly happy man would be that hard? You might not think it would be, but I think probably it would be, because we have everything that we need, especially here in America where we live. It's hard to think that we could be unhappy. I mean, we might be unhappy with our situation today, but tomorrow might be better. But it may be hard to find a happy man. So, so the king's son hears this man in his little hut, and he can tell this man's happy. So he goes in. This man's so poor he didn't even have a shirt. And that was the end of the story. So, saying that the point of this story is this, is that you can be happy with nothing. And it's not things that make you happy. It wasn't a shirt that made that poor man happy. What do you think he was happy about? He was poor. It doesn't even say he had a wife or a family. He was probably alone. Didn't have any clothes, or at least a shirt. What in the world was he happy about? Well, there's a clue. It says, "Now God be praised." Perhaps he was a Christian, and he found happiness and contentment in his Lord. No matter what he didn't have, he didn't care. It didn't matter to him. So anyway, okay, so those are the 3 short stories I wanted to read to you. Now let's go ahead. You can actually put that away. Go ahead and get out your work text. Turn to page 22. We're going to work on that just for a second. Okay, on page 22. Now at the very top up here, we're going to use a table or a chart. Okay, now it says, in my book it says that this is a skill introduction, but I know that you know how to do these because we've done these before. Now it says, put an X in each box to see how the following stories are alike or different. Now, look at the very top of the chart. Okay, it's called story comparisons. Okay, we're going to put our information here. It's going to be just by looking at it. A chart makes things really easy to see all at one time. Okay, now on the left hand side in the purple, you see the names of some of the stories that we've read. Runaway Friends, His First Bronc, Lessons from Mr. Lee, Aesop's Fables, and Tolstoy's Stories. That's hard to say. Okay, and then across this way at the top, realistic characters, talking animal characters, fable, folktale, first-person narrator, setting in Western U.S. These are just some things that these stories have. Okay, so we're going to put an X in everything it has. Let's look at Runaway Friends. Okay, did Runaway Friends have realistic characters? Yes. So put an X in that box right beside Runaway Friends and realistic characters. Put an X there. Okay. Did Runaway Friends have talking animal characters? What about, was it a fable or a folktale? It was not. Okay. Was it told in first person narrator? In other words, did it use the words I and me? The person in the story was in the story that was telling the story? Yes, it was. So put an X under first person narrator. Okay. Was the setting in the Western U.S.? It was. It happened. I think it was like Arizona or New Mexico, so put an X there. Okay. Now, let's look at His First Bronc. Okay. Was it realistic characters? It was, so put an X there. It didn't have talking animal characters. It wasn't a fable or a folk tale. It was not told in first-person narrator. In other words, the person in the story was not telling the story. I think it was third person. It was just somebody outside telling the story. So don't put an X there. Was it set in the Western U.S.? It was. So you'll put an X there. All right, so go ahead and pause it. Finish putting your X's in Lessons from Mr. Lee, Aesop's Fables, and Tolstoy's Stories. Don't do the bottom yet. Just put an X where you think they go. Turn it back on and we'll see if you got this right. Okay, for Lessons from Mr. Lee, you should have put an X under realistic characters and first-person narrator, and that's it. Okay, under Aesop's Fables, and if you got those wrong, it's okay, just fix it. Aesop's Fables, you should have had an X under talking animal characters and fable. And that's it. And under Tolstoy's Stories, you should have put an X under folktale, and that's all. Okay? That's just to kind of look at the chart and be able to kind of tell where we are and what we've been talking about. Okay, now at the bottom there's two questions. We're going to talk about these. You do not have to write your answers on these. We're just going to talk about these right quick, okay? Number 1 says, list 2 ways that Runaway Friends and His First Bronc are similar and 1 way they're different. Look at the chart. 2 ways that Runaway Friends and His First Bronc are similar and 1 way they're different. You can just look at the chart. On Runaway Friends and His First Bronc, both have realistic characters. They're both set, the setting is in the Western United States. And the only one difference is Runaway Friends is told in the first person narrative or narrator. Okay, the other one was not. Okay, so that question or that comment is just wanting you to look up at that chart to kind of see how it works. Look at the second one. What type of story may use talking animal characters to teach a lesson? A fable. A fable, because you have under Aesop's Fables, you put an X under talking animal characters, and that's the only one. So only a fable typically will use talking animal characters to teach a lesson. Okay. I'd like for you to look at work text page 21, and I want you to do this. This is going to be for a grade. At the top, there's 5. You're going to have, these are characters from the short story that we just read, okay? It says choose all the characteristics that match each character, okay? Only 2 of them are going to have 1 answer. The other ones are going to have more than 1 answer, okay? More than 1 answer. At the bottom, these are 6 words that were in those stories, use your glossary, and you're going to write a sentence for 4 of them actually, because there's only room for 4. So just choose 4 of those. If you don't know what they are, look in your glossary in the back of your book. Read what it means. If you need to, look back in the story. And these words are underlined in your story, and you can kind of read the sentence too and see what it means. And just write a sentence that makes sense for 4 of these, okay? Make sure it's a complete sentence. All right, and that will be all of your reading lesson today.